Good morning. My name is Beth Weigel, and I am a leadership coach, a team coach, a small business leadership coach. And I'm here today to talk to you about a subject that I'm really passionate about. It might seem unusual to be passionate about challenging conversations, but let me tell you how I got here. I have found throughout my career, I was in consulting, I worked with customer management and customer relationships, I put together teams, I've managed teams, I've trained teams. And as I mentioned, now I'm a coach and help train leaders. Challenging conversations so often come up. It is so often the topic of challenge for leaders, for individuals, for vendors to customers, customers to vendors, leaders to their team. Challenging conversations come up so often. And I find myself again and again going back to some of the principles that I have found to be useful. So let me speak to you today and be very clear. A lot of what you hear today may be principles you have heard before, and they are not mine. I'm not a sociologist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a neurologist. But I am someone who's passionately interested in this topic. And what I have found is that these good best practices and good principles are really helpful no matter where a challenging conversation comes up, either professionally or personally. And so I have spent the time to curate. What I say today, I'm a curator. These are not necessarily my ideas. The data isn't necessarily mine, but I've curated these best practices. And what I find is, even if we know these best practices, we've read the books, we've gone to the training. When we're in the moment, when we're in those challenging conversations, it is very difficult to pull up those best practices and to remember them and to use them. So today, in addition to walking through some of the best practices and information that I've gotten from experts, I also want to offer you some tools. And when I say tool, it's just like a simple phrase that you can keep in mind, and scripts, meaning what's the first thing you can say to kind of get this part of the conversation going. As a coach, what I find is that is really how I can help leaders. Leaders know what their intent is, to be good leaders, to be good communicators, to service their customers well. They intend that, but in the moment, it's very difficult to apply those principles. So as their coach, I help them take the principle and we talk about applying it in their specific business, to this particular client, to this particular team member. I like to say that the devil is in the application. You know the expression, the devil's in the details? I think the devil's in the application, because the principles are things that we intellectually understand, but it is in the moment when we have to actually apply them that we need some additional support. So I've mentioned a few times that I have a series of, I consider them my experts. These are people who have done the kind of sociological studies and psychology studies that are the foundation of these principles. And I just want to mention a few of them because I, again, don't want to take credit for their brilliance. Probably two of the best ones that I really recommend frequently are Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen. And they've written two books, one called Difficult Conversations, and the other is called Thanks for the Feedback. And if you read no other book on this topic, I highly recommend Thanks for the Feedback. But I also want to mention a few others that I continually go back to. The Good Fight by Leanne Davey. There's a relatively newer voice on the scene. Her name is Amanda Ripley, and she's written a book on high conflict. She's doing the rounds of podcasts, really helpful. If you get a chance to listen to her, she's great. Many of us, maybe even on this call, have been through crucial conversations training, and that is ideally helpful. And then the last one that I really like, and I think I mainly like it because of the title, it's called I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening. And the authors are Sarah Stewart-Holland and Beth Silvers. But here's what I know as a coach. I can recommend the books. I can hand the book to my coachees and my clients, but we're all busy people. And taking the time to read the book, to understand the principles, and then, again, if the devil's in the application, to spend time thinking about how would I apply this, and having it solidly in your head so that you can apply it even if it isn't planned. So let's move on from here. I hope that's a good foundation for where I'm starting. So what do I mean by challenging conversations? So when you read this title, you probably thought, oh my gosh, a challenging conversation. What is that? When I have to fire someone, when I have to go back to a client and say, we can't meet your deadline. We have used up the budget. When I have had to say to an individual on my team, yes, I know you did the work, but this is not acceptable. All of those are challenging conversations. But I really want us to think about challenging conversations in a very broad sense. Rather than they're always that most difficult, most emotional moment, think about a challenging conversation as simply being a conversation that when you have to deliver some information that you know is going to be hard to talk about, and then when you have to receive information that's hard to hear. And it's important to kind of take challenging conversations and bring them down to that very basic definition. In the last couple of months, I did some training with a team that was struggling, and the name of the training was Productive Conflict. And on the very first day of the training, the team said to me, we don't know why you're here. We don't need this. We don't have conflict. And I thought that was really fascinating. So I said, please define for me what you mean by conflict. And they said, well, conflict is emotional difficulties where people walk out of the room and can't work with each other and leave the team. And I said, okay, but what I want us to think about in the same way, let's think about conflict as something very simple. Anytime two ideas rub up against each other. And once I said that, they were like, oh yeah, we have that kind of conflict every day. That kind of conflict's good. Agreed. So in the same way, I tell that story to say, in the same way, today when we're talking about challenging conversations, please think of it as a sliding scale. That's any conversation that includes difficult information to either say or to hear. Now, in a difficult conversation, you may play one or the other of these parts. One, you're the initiator. You're the one who has to give the bad news, the difficult news, just the uncomfortable news. Or you may be the receiver of difficult or uncomfortable news. And today, as I talk through these principles and as I identify these tools and scripts, I want to see if I can, and I think I can, say this tool is helpful in this way if you're the giver, and then in this way if you're the receiver. Probably primarily we're going to talk about being in that receiver role, but I think there are things to learn as well when you're the giver. Challenging conversations are planned or unexpected. Planned ones are helpful because you go in knowing, hey, this is a difficult conversation. Let me think about some of those tools and scripts that I just learned. Let me keep them in mind. Let me pull them up. Let me be intentional about using them. More difficult is when challenging conversations occur and they're unexpected. They can occur in the middle of a conversation with a customer. I think things are going along really well and you hit a hot button and this customer gives you some very difficult information. And one of the things I would hope today is that as I give you some of these very simple topics and scripts, that you will be able to pull them up in the moment. First, you better say, oh, this has just become a challenging conversation. And then knowing that, go, wait, what were those rules? What were those tools and scripts that can be helpful? Where do challenging conversations happen? Well, today we're primarily going to talk about when they happen face-to-face, whether that's in person or online. But certainly challenging conversations happen via email and text. And there are some principles today that are helpful as well in responding via email and text. One of the other pieces I want to talk about today is that we're talking about that moment when the conversation becomes challenging. And what I want to help us do today is to navigate that moment. Listen, the meeting may go on to require some resolutions of some really difficult, challenging things that have come up. We can't fix the problem. The tools I'm going to give you today are not going to take care of that ultimate issue that needs to be collaborated on. But what I want us to do with these tools is what I say, set the table for that cooperative, productive conversation. And so as Douglas Stone says in his book, Difficult Conversations, the very first thing he says in the book is, if you've come to this book with the hope that I can tell you how to avoid difficult conversations, you're going to be sorely disappointed. Challenging conversations happen, they will happen, and they're part of working in the world and working with other human beings. But what we're going to talk about today is navigating that short time, that uncomfortable space of time, so that we can set the table, navigate it, so that we can go on to have a really productive conversation beyond that. So that's kind of the why of where we are today. Challenging conversations happen because we exchange information and perspectives. And what we want to do is we want to navigate those moments, that interaction, so that we can create an opportunity to do some good collaboration, problem solving, and aligning. We want to ensure, however we navigate the difficult part, we want to ensure that we've created the opportunity for this to be a productive relationship. And also we want to navigate that difficult part of the conversation in a way that preserves the dignity of each participant. And that means sometimes ensuring that, if you are the receiver, ensuring that your dignity is preserved as well. We've probably all been in conversations where, whether they started with a difficult or challenging exchange, or it came up in the middle. And we, in some cases, if we do not navigate that well, we feel through the rest of the conversation, through the problem solving that we all do beyond that, there is a shadow hanging over it. There's a shadow hanging over kind of the tone of the meeting. And so what I'm hoping is some of these practices we're going to talk about today will help us to get to a place where we can kind of resolve that and move to a place of really respecting each other and collaborating and bringing our best selves to that problem solving part of the meeting. I've seen it done well, and then I've seen it where it isn't really dealt with, and the ramifications are it is a less productive meeting. I think everybody in those experiences, everybody can't wait to get out of the meeting and go and express their emotions and their frustrations. So I want to help us to navigate that well. I've broken down that section of a conversation that's difficult into these 4 parts. And I'm going to break them down and talk about them in great detail. And they may happen in just a few moments. So it's as if I've slowed the conversation down, and I'm going to kind of take it off layer by layer by layer. And so you may find that this all happens pretty quickly, but we're being scientists, and we're examining it one piece by piece, or one layer by layer. So the first is we're going to understand the internal experience of giving or receiving challenging information. We're going to talk about what it means to truly master the other person's perspective. We're going to talk about how do you craft your message, your response, again, in a way that preserves the dignity of both participants and resolves it or navigates it in a way that we can be productive beyond this piece. And lastly, and this may happen almost in our heads, is the ability to kind of take that tension and use it as an opportunity for understanding and growth. So let's talk about that first piece. So you receive difficult, challenging information. It's important, and I'm not a neurologist, to know that the very first place in your brain that you are processing that is what they call the animal brain, the protective part of your brain, the survivor part of your brain. And that's the part of the brain that allows us, a tiger is coming at us. We don't sit there and contemplate what we've known about tigers and may he eat me or not. We jump out of the way, we run. We're in the street and a car is coming at us fast. We don't say, gosh, I wonder if that car has good enough brakes to really stop without hitting me. We don't go through that thoughtful processing of the information. We have that immediate reflexive action, get out, move. And so this is a critical part of our brain and an important part of survival, but it is a brain that has a pretty limited response. And you've probably heard these spoken of, this limited response. In that moment, that reflexive part of your brain has 3 default responses: fight, flight, or freeze. And for the purpose of those incidents in our survival that require one of those 3 reflexive responses, that's ideal. But if you respond to challenging information in a complex relationship by that part of your brain, science tells us the response is most likely reflexive, meaning it's not necessarily what you would really do if you thought about it. And second, unproductive, destructive, right? In that moment, your motivation is just to protect yourself. And so in a business circumstance, somebody comes at you, a customer makes an accusation or is unhappy with your work. If you responded with a fight perspective, you might finger point and say, well, your person didn't give us the information we needed. Or you might be really defensive. It's unfair. You gave us too much to do with too little time. Right? That's not going to move us to a productive place. And when you think about it, that's probably not the full breadth of what you'd like to do to respond. The flight piece is, that's it. I'm done. I'm out of here. I don't want you as a customer. I don't want you as a vendor. I can't work with you. And the last part, which might be the most damaging, is when you freeze and just say, okay, I'll take what you're saying and I'll just do what you say, right? That's not a balanced, productive relationship. So the learning here is to not let that first part of your brain be your response. You want the information to travel to what they call the prefrontal cortex, the frontal lobe, the executive part of your brain. And that takes a moment or several moments. And I know for me, it helps me to even think when I'm feeling that adrenaline, emotional reaction, just give it a second, this is going to move to my prefrontal cortex. That's going to give me perspective, the ability to analyze, the ability to think about how I really want to manage this. So it's important to know that first response is from this part of the brain. And ideally, you want to let that response flow and get to the better part of your brain. So the tool that I offer and the script that I provide is this. The tool is to pause. Again, you're recognizing it's a challenging conversation. You're recognizing that responsive survivor kind of, I want to fight back. And you're going to pause that. Let that information travel to the better part of your brain and use this acronym. Why am I talking? Pause and wait, because this is not necessarily where you want to be talking, responding from. So the tool is pause and wait. And I've advised my clients and they're like, okay, that makes sense. I want to pause. I want to wait. I don't want to be talking from that part of my brain, but I can't just stare at someone and look like a deer in headlights. So they would say to me, give me a sentence I can say while I'm pausing, while I'm letting this move on. And so here are a couple of the scripts that I offer. Just saying something like, that's new information to me. Or I didn't realize you had that perspective. Or we didn't know you thought that. Now you can see none of those responses commit you to how you are going to respond. They simply say, I received it. I heard you. And this gives you that opportunity to let that flow to the part of your brain you really want to respond with. Interestingly, I just heard a podcast with Melissa McCarthy, who's, you might know her from Bridesmaids, and she was describing how she has such a responsive reaction when someone comes at her. And she wishes she wasn't so responsive, and she wishes she could wait and think about what she's talking about and what she's responding. And so she uses a technique in her head where she'll say, I need to walk around the block. I really should. This is one of those moments where she take a walk around the block. Now she can't actually take the walk around the block, but when she recognizes it, she says, hold on, stop. Don't respond from this part of my emotional response. If you do respond from this place, it is the most common cause of that feeling later where you said, I wish I hadn't said this, I wish I had asked this question, all those later thoughts that maybe if you'd let it go to your prefrontal cortex, you would have thought you've been that thoughtful and that intentional. There's a French expression called l'esprit d'escalier, which is the thought you have on the stairs. In other words, the thought you have later as you're walking away. And so that's going to happen. You're going to have the most of those if you respond from this place. So now I've been primarily talking about this tool and this script as if you are the giver of difficult news. I'm sorry, as if you are the receiver of difficult news. Now I do want to switch and say, what if I'm the giver of difficult news? I want you to be aware that what we're talking about here is how your receiver is receiving difficult news, right? They might not know that their first response is going to be an emotional fight, flight, freeze response. Help them to pause. Help them to cool themselves a little bit and let this information move from their responsive brain. Give them the opportunity to say, I'm going to let you think about that. That's clearly new information for you. Take a moment. I know when I have to give bad news, I so often say, gosh, we can't make the deadline, but these are the things we're going to do to fix it. And I don't give them that pause. I immediately give them all kinds of solutions. And that's not really ideal. They're still in that responsive part of their brain. They really can't hear my ideas and adequately understand them because I've rushed them through this piece. So that's understanding the internal experience and pausing and waiting so that you can let the information go to the wiser part of your brain and give the kind of response that really will result in moving to a more productive space. So this is one of my favorite quotes from Douglas Stone. And I think it sometimes upends us a little bit. Difficult conversations are almost never about getting the facts right. They're about conflicting perceptions, interpretations, and value. They are not about what is true. They are about what is important. I think so often we think the solution is let's come to an agreement about the facts. And the reality is that it's so much broader than that. So this next piece is really maybe the hardest part of this exchange. And that is if what this difficult moment in our relationship is really more about perceptions and values and what's important, I need to let the person who's delivering this difficult information really fully express themselves. I need to ask myself, what are they really telling me? And that's an important piece of information because I want the full understanding of why they're giving me this difficult information. And I know it's very tempting to want to just jump right in and respond. I think we've all watched so many court cases on television and legal dramas where we feel like every moment we let them say something that we don't agree with or that we think is unfactual, we want to say, Your Honor, I object. And in reality, that fighting their perspectives fact by fact by fact is not going to get us where we think we want to be. So we need to let them fully express themselves. And you'll even find people will come off with their headline. Their first statement is very emotional and very generalized. And rather than question them bit by bit, get them to really tell you what's going on. There's an interesting article recently in Forbes that said when a client comes at you with all of a sudden very unrealistic expectations, there's likely something that has happened to them that you don't know about. There's context you don't know about. Their board chair has been on their case about spending money or meeting deadlines. They have some anxiety about the success of the contract you all have together. There are things you don't know, and knowing them will really assist you in giving fully understanding them, first of all, and then giving your response. So we're about to watch a video from the Harvard Business Review, one of my favorite sources, that talks about listening like a negotiator. So think about a negotiator. A negotiator tends to sit across from someone and really wants to hear all that they need and all that they want from the agreement. And the negotiator knows, I can't give it all to you, but I'm going to listen to you long enough to fully understand what's important to you. And so there are 3 techniques in this video that I find really helpful at this part of challenging conversations. Now we're going to use a little magic here, and I'm going to unshare, and then my helper is going to share that video, and then we'll be back. Stella, I can't hear. Still can't hear, unfortunately. Are you muted? Yeah, there you go.
You hear now?
Yes.
Try it again.
Take it back.
Creators present themselves as collaborators and try to meet the other person in the middle. To do that, you need to show that you really understand the other person's logic, emotions, and perspective. These 3 strategies can help. Use short, simple, and vocal prompts. Oh, really? Interesting. Go on. The aim is to nudge the other person to continue and make them feel understood. Ask open questions. Good open questions start with what and how. So what do you think has to happen for us to get aligned on this? Questions that start with why tend to sound more accusatory or judgmental. Why do you think your way is a good way to solve the problem? Reflect back or mirror the last few words you hear. By carefully choosing which words you mirror, you can steer the conversation in the direction that you'd like or encourage the other person to elaborate. Unfortunately, there's no room in the budget to add resources to this project. No room in the budget? Yeah, well, let me explain. Leave room for silence. Pause gives your counterpart space to collect their thoughts or vent in ways that can be informative to you.
This thing called...
Do you want to keep playing?
No.
Okay.
Can you let me share again? Okay. So some great techniques there. I want to comment that in all 3 techniques, silence is key. Creating the opportunity for them to tell you fully. And I may say this 2 or 3 times today because I think it is something that I need to hear again and again. Letting someone fully express themselves and say things from their perspective does not mean that you agree with everything that they say. I think sometimes we feel like if we let someone say it out loud, they are going to assume that we agree, and it doesn't mean that. Letting them fully say where they're coming from is actually just helping us to fully understand their perspective. Again, that whole legal drama thing, I think we have to stop them fact by fact and go, that's not true and that's not true. And in reality, we interrupt their flow and we don't get that full perspective that they're coming at us with. I cannot underestimate or comment more on the fact that just saying the word really in a way that's not like really, that's what you think. No, but just an open really gets people to talk more and gives you information. Now, I have no doubt that this is hard. Maybe it's just hard for me, but it's hard for me. And here's why is this hard? Again, thinking that if I let them say it out loud, they think I'm going to agree. We're going to go from that foundation moving on. That's clearly, I think, something that I had to learn. But in the book, thank you for the feedback. One of the things that really is helpful is they have a list of things that keep us from fully hearing what the person is saying. These are some things we do to ourselves that derail our good listening. The first one is truth spotting. The minute someone in their full explanation says something we don't agree with, we say, well, that's not true, and we stop listening, or we don't fully hear them. The next thing we have a tendency to do is make it about the whole relationship. They're talking about where they're coming from, and we're thinking they don't really want to work with us. They've been looking for a reason to get rid of us, and we make it about the relationship, and we're missing the point. We're missing what they're saying to us. And then the last one, and I picked 3, and I think there's 10 in that book, is switch tracking. where we say, they say we're unhappy with your work, and we say, well, you're a really difficult client, and you didn't do this, and you didn't do that, and that switch tracking takes it off of their topic, and takes it to a different place, and it's not really what it's about. This is the hard part. This being quiet, this asking open questions, this letting them fully articulate their perspective is the hardest part of what we're talking about today. And I understand it's hard. It's hard to hear it, and it's hard to not spend that whole time mounting your case for the response. But I cannot say how valuable it is to fully be like a negotiator and listen to what they're saying. It's going to give you information, maybe information you don't agree with, but it's going to give you information that's going to allow you to move forward in this relationship and get us to that productive place. So the tool is listen like a negotiator before responding. We all say we're good listeners, but I think, very often we're mounting our case in our head and we're not really listening to what they're saying. And the script is those 3 from that video, and I'm happy to provide that as well. Those short, simple response, really, and then silence. The what or how questions. What brought this up right now? How did this come top of mind? How do you see this fitting with everything else we're doing? And then mirroring those last few words. And if particularly those are the words you're worried about, they say, we can't do this, my board won't have it. Saying something like, your board won't have it, and silence. Getting them to fully tell you where they are coming from. Again, you might not agree with it, but it is information that is helpful for you to have. Now we get to the part, as my coaches or my clients will say, finally, I get to respond, right? Finally, it's my turn. And so what I'm going to say, as you're fully listening to them, you're thinking, what is their currency today? And by currency, I mean, what is the hot button that they're talking about? I'm worried about the timeline. I'm worried about the deadline. It's all about the time. That's their currency today. Or I'm worried about the budget, or I'm worried about the impact. The thing they keep coming back to gives you a clue as to what is top of mind for them. Now, use what you know about them. Use what you know about their organization, what limits they have. Certainly, that's part of the relationship. Use what you fully know about them. And then be sure to include the framework that you share. Well, given the contract that we have with each other or the project that we're working on, use that as your framework. Keep it very grounded in that. And you are going to find gaps in their perspective. And so what I want you to do at this point, and again, some of these are going to happen in very short moments, but to think about what they've said to you, but also what you think are, what I say, the gaps in their story. They've told a story and you've let them fully tell it. What are the gaps in their story? And the things that you want to be included in the conversation. And rather than attack them issue by issue, fact by fact, gap by gap, going back to this whole concept that it's not about the facts, it's about what's important today, I want you instead to use this tool, yes and. That yes is, yes, I heard you. And we're most likely to say yes, but yes, but discards everything that happened before. You may know this expression, yes, and it's from improvising troops, right? You get these actors all up and they're on stage and they have to add on to each other. And so somebody says, we're at the zoo, and the next person can't say yes, but we're going over here. No, this concept is, I'm not going to refute what you've said. I'm going to add on to it my perspective. Very different, probably, again, than those legal dramas. And so here's a great format. I call it the medical format, and I use it in all kinds of spaces, but I think it's particularly helpful here. You want a chance to tell the whole story back to them the way you see it. And so if you've ever watched, I'm going to go way back and show my age, the show ER, where in the emergency room, doctors had to come out and really deliver difficult news. They always use this format. And the format is, they tell the context, they tell the actions, and then they tell the result. So I'm going to give you an example. Sorry, it's maybe a little gory, but I'll give you a business example as well. So they'll say your patient, your whatever, your loved one, your patient was in a very severe car accident, and their heart stopped at the scene, and they lost a lot of blood, and they weren't able to be revived at the scene. And so that's the context, the action. We brought them into our emergency room. We restarted their heart. We gave them blood. We attempted to stop the blood from them from continuing to bleed. But unfortunately, we were not able to save the patient. So why do they do that? They tell the whole story because it allows them to ensure that the person receiving the news has the full story. It makes no assumption that they know what the initial situation was, what the actions were taken, and then what the result is. And it really does make it a fuller story. So now that I've done a gory version of this, let me give you a business example. I just had a client work with this. So they go to a client and they have to deliver the bad news that we've used up all the budget that we've assigned for this work. And so they start, you hired us to automate and standardize your finances and your financial related services. And you told them they were very manual and very disorganized. We put all your finances on QuickBooks. We standardized your invoice and payment processes. You now have a monthly report and a monthly dashboard that gives you real clarity around the full picture. You're right. Your financial information was more scattered than we even thought. And as a result, we've used up all the initial hours and finances that we had to get this work done. So you can see that this allows you to tell the story your way and fully, and it allows you to fill in the gaps that you noticed when the person who gave you the bad news or started the difficult conversation left out. And this script format is really helpful in lots of places, but I find here it's very helpful because it lets you retell it from your perspective. These difficult conversations are most likely a convergence of two different perspectives. So now we're going to talk about turning this tension into growth. We've been in these moments, whether the conversation started in a tough spot or came up in the middle, where there's been this interaction that's been difficult to hear. Hopefully we've been able to calm ourselves, to allow them to fully articulate where they're coming from, to be able to give our full response back. And now we've got that uncomfortable feeling, right? They've given us some information that was hard to hear. And so maybe just in our head, we need to find a place to put it. Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen again talk about difficult conversations like this really attack our self-image. We can't help ourselves. Even if we've got a healthy self-image, we're thinking, oh, okay, they really don't think I'm good at this. So it's important in that moment to say there's opinion and there's feedback. So opinion and feedback may appear similar, but opinions primarily reflect the thoughts of the leader, of the thoughts of the giver, the thoughts and perspectives of the giver. They just need to express it. While feedback is designed to benefit and guide the receiver. And so I think it's important when you've received difficult information to say, good, either one of these are good pieces of information, even if it is just their opinion. And just say, that's good information, that's their opinion, good to know as we move forward. And then there's a possibility that there's some opportunity here that it's real feedback. I would advise you in that moment not to necessarily commit to accepting the feedback, but to say, let me give that some thought, and then go check and see if that feedback is consistent with what else you hear from other people that work with you. And then determine, because it is as the receiver, it's really up to you to decide whether to accept or act on the feedback. If it's opinion, good to know and helpful for the relationship, but not necessarily something that you want to act on. So this final tool is to consider, is it opinion or is it feedback? And to stay in a place where you can respond but not commit might be, thanks for that perspective, thanks for that feedback. So I know I've covered quite a bit, and I saw somebody wants me to repeat the books that I used, and I absolutely can provide those. But these are those quips, those tools that I hope can be helpful to you when you either go into a planned challenging conversation Or when you, in the middle of a conversation, go, oh, this just became challenging. The first is pause and wait. Why am I talking? The second is listen. Listen like a negotiator before responding. Let them fully say what they need to say. The next is respond, craft your message, but it's a yes and. And then finally, to take this tension and to use it in a way that is going to inform the relationship, whether it causes your change in action or not. So opinion or feedback. Again, I am a leadership coach, an executive coach. And this is, I feel it's this application piece that I spend my days doing. That's where this comes from, and that's where I use these tools. And I thank you for your time today. I think we're gonna see if there's some, I'll stop screen sharing and see if we can look in the questions. Stella, if you see some questions that I do not, please speak up. I'm in
the Q&A box. When is it acceptable to discuss a
Oh.
lack of emotional intelligence, and how should you approach it?
Okay, that's an interesting one. I think I'd need to know a little bit more about that, but I would say that frequently you will come with a real awareness of emotional intelligence, and you will recognize that there is not as strong emotional intelligence in the room. And so that's where you can sometimes use some of these techniques to guide them, like that whole concept of wait, or the concept of saying, it's really important that I want to fully hear what your perspective is. And I was quiet and allowed that. And I want to, I think it will really be helpful for us both if you allow me to give my full perspective. So I'm not sure that really answered it, but I understand, you come in a room with these ideas in your head and you're like, they didn't listen to the seminar. They're not using the same tools. And so you need to guide them a little bit.
Can you share the book list?
I will, definitely. And is it best, should I just say them out loud? I can't list them all really quickly. Stella, what would be the best thing to do?
Or maybe put them in a chat.
Okay, I might have to do that after we stop taking the questions. Again, you can tell my favorite experts in this space are Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen, and that was thanks for the feedback and difficult conversations. One of the things that tells me this continues to be such a challenge is I am a subscriber to Harvard Business Review and Forbes and Entrepreneur. I promise you, every single month, every single issue, there is some article that touches on this: how to be a better communicator, how to be a better listener, etc.
Can you speak about crisis management and how to handle a crisis in an organization? Who should be in your team?
That's such a broad perspective. I know that in your team, I can't say totally who should be along in their team, but in your team should be somebody that has a really good grasp of how to negotiate through difficult to get to productive, right? You need somebody who is a bit of a negotiator. And you may even have to say to that team member, you need to, yes, be loyal to us, but be the intermediary, be the negotiator, be the facilitator of moving this along. Be sure to have someone who's really pretty comfortable in that tense moment. And there are not a lot of examples of people who can really handle fully hearing it all and not getting tense. And this is not at all political, but watch Pete Buttigieg. He is able to go into groups where there's a lot of disagreement, probably with what his stated opinion is, and he's very comfortable letting the full extent of people's perspectives be said. He does not feel the need to stop them in the middle. He allows it to play out and has the confidence to know he can bring this to a productive place without arguing point by point. And so have someone like that in your crisis management, I think is really going to be critical. Somebody asked, do you care? Okay. Go ahead.
How do you approach or handle a person that is aggressive and making you feel uncomfortable?
Challenging. I think it is really important for you to understand what's going on in terms of you personally when they come at you with aggression. Remember that it is likely for you to have a very significant response from that animal survivor brain. It's going to be really hard for you to move past that into that prefrontal cortex part of your brain when you do not feel safe. That is the very purpose of that part of your brain. So getting to a place where you can be comfortable enough to say, okay, my full executive brain is responding is going to be much more difficult. It may be, it may take you longer to get there. Don't rush it. And be aware that if it requires you to step out or step out of the conversation for a moment, to allow that to happen and for you to feel safe enough to go back in. But it is definitely going to take you longer to get there if someone is making you feel uncomfortable and is really aggressive. Somebody asked, do you carry cue cards? And I will say that when I have my clients do this online, I have them put stickies, Post-it notes around, reminding them don't respond from the animal brain, pause and wait. Letting them say it out loud does not mean I agree with it. Those hints remind you of these good techniques and allow you to kind of let it play out. Ooh, okay, so I'm reading the one about you have a superior who's requiring you to deliver a controversial message, and you don't necessarily agree, but you have to deliver it, and you might even agree with the people in the room. I think that's a function of being able to see yourself in that moment as really just the deliverer. That's a tough one. And you're going to hear their responses are going to be probably from their unsafe space, from their animal brain and their survivor brain. And you want to let them play out, and you won't be able to refute them completely, but your crafting your message is going to be pretty rote. This is the situation we're in. This is what I've been asked to deliver. Here's the actions that were taken that got us there. Here's the message. So kind of sticking to that format, as well as allowing everybody in that room to fully express their perspective, right? Their full, just letting them fully articulate how they're feeling about it and where they're coming from. Stella, any others?
Let me double check. No. How do you,
Okay.
I think we answered this one in the Q&A box.
Let me see. How do you
Just
practically
ask that.
control your emotions in intense conflict? That is an ever evolving circumstance. That's a great question. I spend time in this place. I do this, I coach others, and I need to be coached. There are times in my personal life where I need to bring up, hey, this is a challenging conversation. And as much as I want to come back at my husband, I need to say, wait, let him fully say it. Don't disagree point by point. I think this is like a muscle, and it's a muscle that, it gets flabby, and then you have to remind yourself, and then you have to try it again. And you may go into a conversation like this and use one or two of these tools, not all. This has been lovely. We've been able to talk this through like we had total control of the conversation. That's not the reality. We all know that, right? So any pieces of this that you can use to navigate, to get through it, and I cannot stress enough how critical it is to preserve the dignity of both of the participants. And that includes you. Like if you're feeling unsafe, if you're feeling that they're being really aggressive, you need to preserve your dignity as well. You will not bring your best person to the problem solving and the collaborating. And so it is an ever evolving journey for us all, I think. Other questions? Oh, there's more on the, okay. How do you meet people where they are as far as people who are in leadership? So the question is, what if you have a leader who does not have these skills? And that's that concept of sometimes managing backwards, meaning using these techniques to say, I need a minute. You just gave me some really tough news. And you know what? That part of me that's responding is really emotional. And I want the best part of me to respond. So can you just give me a minute? Or to say, again, I understand what you're saying, but I'd like you to say more, right? You've just heard something difficult. So really kind of coaching them through this process. And again, saying, I listened to your full explanation of why you're unhappy. And it would really be helpful, I think, to us both, and certainly to me, to be given the opportunity to fully express it, my perspective on this, my story on it. I'm not sure. Are you currently learning these new tools every day, or is there a point where any owner has everything down pat and under control? Again, Taja, I've not met anybody who is ideal at this, but I have been in the room where people have handled a tough situation so well that everybody in the room feels whole and the meeting is able to go on to a productive place. I think when I see that, I aspire to it. And that has sent me to do this kind of research and kind of boiling down these good principles. Okay, how could I actually execute on them in the moment, in a meeting? And particularly when the difficult conversation comes up unexpectedly. So I think, have we handled it all? I feel like we have. Somebody asked me to put my contact information up again, and I will do that with your permission. Trouble sharing that. So there, I'm probably not the best version of that. There's my information. I certainly welcome meeting or talking with any of you further. Again, this is a topic I have great passion around. I think we're pretty much at time, don't you, Stella?
Yes, we have 2 minutes left.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Let me see if I've caught them all. I'll just repeat a few of the other, in addition to Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen, those 2 books. I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening by Holland and Silvers is a good one. The Good Fight by Leanne Davey is excellent. And then again, Amanda Ripley, who's been going around talking about high conflict. She does a beautiful job of really kind of analyzing conflict. And again, she's been on a lot of podcasts. Look for her. So, okay. Well, I thank you for your time. I thank you for this opportunity to talk about something that I think we all can get better at. And with that, I hope you have a good day.
Thank you, Mary, for today's presentation. Thank you for attending today's webinar. To learn more about our upcoming webinars, please visit chicago.gov/BACP webinars. If you are a part of the BACP certificate program, your account will automatically reflect your attendance today. To learn more about that program, please visit chicago.gov/BACP certificate. And again, today's webinar was recorded and will be available on our YouTube page at youtube.com/Chicago BACP. Thank you again to Mary, and everyone have a great Friday and a great weekend.